everyone, and welcome to another Scots Wi Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by singer, songwriter, composer and arranger, Debra Salem. Hello, Debra.
Hello there.
And we're here to talk about In A Sma Room, which is a CD, a songbook, theatre performance, and more. So could you describe to us what In A Sma Room is?
Oh, it's a journey. I mean, actually, the album itself feels very much like a sort of a, those things in the glam rock times when you did project albums. You start at the beginning and you get to the end. I think the album needs to be listened to in its entirety. It has these 18 songs and 18 William Soutar poems that myself and two other composers, that was Kevin Mackenzie and Paul Harrison, made into songs. And originally it was part of a show that was a theatre and music piece. And then the last few years, we worked at making them into an album of all the music that we did for it, including 5 extra tracks that we never got the chance to do in the original show because it was only an hour long. So we'd written 18, but we could only ever do 13. So it was a real joy to get them back out again and to get them out there and get them played. Yeah.
So you mentioned William Soutar there, and it's based on his poems. For those people who don't know, and I think it would probably quite a lot of people listening, who was William Soutar?
He was a poet from Perth and lived not very far from where I am now, which is, I think, possibly why I connected with him really well, because when I lived in my first house in Perth, which is where I am, his house was just up the street, and so I could see it from my house. And I always wondered, because you always see the plaque on the wall, and I didn't know very much about him when I first came because I'm not from I'm from Belfast, I'm not from Scotland. You might have guessed. And so it was really, I didn't know much about him. And then as my children started to do poems in schools, the Scots poems, and they would come through and come around, and I heard more and more of his stuff. And then I was introduced to him through the Friends of William Soutar, who actually asked me to do a project once whenever they had heard me singing some songs that I'd written myself, and said, would you fancy setting one of William Soutar poems? And yeah, so he, I have to make sure I get this right now because I never get these wrong. 1988 he was born, died in 1943. And the last 13 of his years of his life he spent in a bed looking out of the window in his room in the house in Wilson Street, and solid and not moving because he had ankylosing spondylitis. Isn't that how you pronounce it? Ankylosing spondylitis. And which meant that his sort of spine was fused. And, you know, these days they'd get people up and walking about, but then stay in your bed. And he sat up with his bow tie and people would come and call on him. And in fact, one of the second songs on the album, which is called Impromptu in an Aromatic Mood, the words, what are they? I am William who would hearken. I mean, the whole thing is about him talking about all the people. I am William who would hearken for the small and steady voice, but the breezy bodies come and go in love with their own noise. I love that idea that he's writing a song and about him being there and people visiting him all the time. Yeah, I just think he was. I've always loved the stories of people because I think it really impacts on how you view what they did, and it's really interesting to look at his poetry from that point of view and just to see that world he created. And the album itself has a picture on the front of it, which was I gave to Brian Angus. Yeah, that one. Yep. And I gave a picture to Brian Angus, who's an artist up in Banff. A friend of ours, and I gave him the picture of the real picture of the room. In the book there's the picture of it. Yeah. And I just loved what he did with it. I said, sir, I want the album to like something, have this sense of it. And the creation, what he did with that big white window on it, it's just that the sense of anything is behind that window, you know, all his thoughts, all his dreams. It wasn't this thing, it's he looked out to his garden and all this beautiful poetry, and it is beautiful poetry.
I think absolutely it is beautiful poetry, and that if people watching this on the video version, you're right. What stands out with that, you know, there's lots of detail in the curtain and the chair and the floor and everything, but the window is absolutely blank. You know, it's a definite statement. And you were saying about people coming to visit him, and these just weren't any people. I mean, he was highly involved with
Oh,
the Scottish literary renaissance of the
yeah,
early
yeah.
20th century. MacDiarmid was a great champion and friend, you know, Hugh MacDiarmid. So these were, you know, his poetry was well thought of at the time, wasn't it?
And it really was. Interestingly, funny enough, I spoke to somebody recently whose father, who I think his father was something to do with the church, and he spoke to me about him remembering him going in with his, who was little,
Mm.
going in with his dad to visit this man, and he would be in the other room getting a cup of tea or something, and his father would be in the other room, you know, being held as Soutar was holding court, I suppose, if you think about it. And yeah, yeah, I mean, he was very appreciated amongst those people who those literary people. I think I read an article somewhere, I could be wrong, you know, I never like to make statements and then go, this is a fact, but I think I saw something about 300 odd people would visit him, you know, a year or something. You know, there was a lot of, he had a lot of guests. I think in that house. It's an amazing concept that he just sat there, and how actually utterly exhausting it must have been.
But that's, I mean, the kind of literary good and the great would come from around the Scotland and from elsewhere as well to come in and discuss poetry and talk to this man, which just shows you not just how well he was considered, but what a fantastic poet he was and is. And we were chatting before we started that it seems that even though those in the know still consider him one of Scotland's greatest poets, he isn't that well known compared to
and
others.
and he's not, and it's really interesting because I found myself I was a few years back, you know, before as we call it, to the time that we're in now. I was down at the Parliament, Hollywood, and I was looking in the gift shop. And because for some obscure reason, I always go and see, when I look at the poetry section, I always look for Soutar. It's like this thing that I sort of go, I wonder if they have any, and there wasn't any.
Mm.
And there was, I think there was a poem in a compilation of many poems, and I went to ask somebody in the shop, do you have anything? There wasn't even, you know, Diaries of a Dying Man. There was nothing of William Soutar there, which so I thought was really sad. I thought he should be represented here. You've got Burns, you've got everybody else who you think you should have, but there wasn't Soutar. Now I have come to realize that more recently that there actually is not an awful lot that is still in print,
Yeah.
and there is currently Paul Philippou is currently doing some work on the the collected works of Soutar poems, which will be really exciting when it comes out. You know, he's putting them all together, and actually Tippermuir Books are the people who published the book part of this compilation, so it's just carrying on, and he wrote the foreword or the essay about Soutar in the book that goes with the songbook that goes with the album.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he just isn't as known as he should be, and that's the thing. I just feel that, and I think that when we did this album, when I was really interested in doing it, was you felt that you know, some people find things through lots of different roads. So somebody who might like Paul's music might go, oh, what's this? And they'll find Soutar. You know, somebody who might Kevin or me, or somebody who likes the poems might find the music. Funny enough, the thing that's happened with the poems for me is now I find it really hard to remember them unless I sing them. They have become they've become songs to me. When I think of them, I have to go, what's the words for that? I have to sing the song in my head in order to find what the words are again, because I know them now so much. I listen to them as songs, and they make beautiful songs, and they really just jump off the page to you, you know.
I think you said something interesting earlier about the CD almost being like a concept album. You know, you
Mm.
listen to it in one go, and I think that's absolutely right. That's how I've been listening to it all the way through, and then you go back to the beginning and do so again. But which is interesting, because you would think maybe with a book of poetry, you might, you know, read one or jump into another. So what is it you think about putting them to music, or the way you've put them to music, that kind of tells a story, if you like?
I think, well, interestingly, you know, if you combine it with going back a bit when we had it with the show itself,
Yeah.
you know, AJ wrote these beautiful pieces of monologue that were spoken from the point of view. I mean, it was the vehicle was the idea. There was Madame Luzaska, who was a medium, and when we talked about it, the whole idea was that we wanted to represent him, but he didn't need to speak because the songs were
Yeah.
him speaking. but we needed to hear from him at the end, which is why we had that one single poem when he suddenly is brought through. The medium finally gets it, but the medium keeps trying to get him, but keeps getting Hugh McDermott, getting his mother, getting his father, getting, you know, all these people in his life that tell his story. Because again, it was that lovely thing of, I mean, he was there watching, was it the German fleet surrendering, and how he got the virus that gave him the ankylosing spondylitis was when he got food poisoning on a ship, and there's all this brilliant stuff, and the fact that he took out his primary class on strike whenever he was young, you know, and he was just a man that had just, it was just really interesting. And actually reading Paul's essay was really interesting for me, because there was lots of stuff that I didn't know in terms of his education. I had gone down one road and gone down another. But whenever AJ wrote the monologues, and then Paul, Kevin, and I got a whack load of poems. And she said, I think these ones will maybe lend themselves, because not every poem lends itself, you know, in a way. And then we chose maybe sort of like 6 or 7 each, or more, you know, maybe I'll keep these 8 to myself. And interestingly, we all chose different poems. There was nobody went, oh no, I wanted that one. It was just, this is the 6 I want, whatever. And then when we wrote them, AJ was the one who chose what went into the original show, because she felt that they sat well with the story that she was telling, which was chronological and took him from birth to the end. And then whenever we added the other 5 in, I don't know, there was a way, and I can't really explain it, but there was a way that it worked. For example, I knew I wanted to finish with ballad, because it has the words of the thing in it, and it's quite different, and it sits there, and it's a really beautiful way to round off the album, because it has, say, In A Sma Room, and I thought that was beautiful to be there. We had originally thought of putting impromptu at the beginning, the one I am William who would hearken one, because he says, hello, I'm William, but then it was wrong to start there. It felt sort of like we need to have this, it felt right to put maybe jazz one just at the beginning, and it was like sort of setting out your wares, you know, it could be a bit of this, and then you go into the next one and it could be a bit of this. I think musically that's the thing, you don't know what you're going to get. It's a bit like what's that, the one he picks out all the chocolates, Forrest Gump, you know. Every chocolate's going to be different when you don't know what's in the middle. And I think that sometimes that's to do with the album, because we have 3 different people with 3 different styles across 18 different songs, and each of us wanted to maybe do something slightly differently, find our way through the song in what felt true to us when we put music to that song. That, you know, the authenticity of what felt musically correct with those words.
That's really interesting, because I'm not musical at all, but I would say that with every, because you talk about the mixture of the music, it's kind of really rich and diverse, and you've got folk and jazz and some classical and even some kind of world influences as well, I would say. But each song, as you kind of mentioned, has one of those to the fore. Is that kind of right? Is there one that dominates?
I think it does, but I don't think I don't think it was a choice. I think actually, whenever I remember when I was writing Recollection, which is one of my favorite ones, and it didn't go in the show, the original, so I was really delighted to be able to put it into the, and I go back to Simply, so I find it's funny, I listen back to them, I go, you can always tell my songs because they're a little bit less instruments in them, you know, it's just me at the piano, or you know, Paul on the piano, and me singing, but I remember writing that one, and these chords came out when I read the words, and it literally was that, it was like those chords and these words and this tune, and it felt like a sort of on the edge of jazz, but not quite, but had jazz inflections. But yet I remember when I was writing Old Sang, when I was writing that one, I felt that I wanted there to be and because I knew that people had written that type of song and varying variations over the years, that type of thing, and I wanted to have it a bit of a groove, and it has a dum 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 dugga dugga dugga, and it moves through, and that was me having taken the influences of all the things. So, you know, all our brains are melting pots of music that we have heard, and that we listen to and that we love, and I went down a marginally more folky route for that, or Arthur Bides. So for all the ones for me, I know. But then you have people like Paul, who made really rich arrangements, very full, uh, spectres, Sorrow of the Spectres. Oh my goodness, that's just so much. He's got these riffs in them. So I find that, yeah, I think the choice came when you sat with it and you listened to it and you read it. I mean, like the others, I read those poems over and over again. And interestingly, the Arthur Bides, I wrote a version of that.
Mhm.
Didn't sit with me. And I remember thinking, oh, that's the one. That's it. No, it wasn't. And I listened back because I still got it on my phone, and I think, how did I ever think that was the Earth Abides? That is not the Earth Abides. This, the one I've got now, that's the one I'm looking for. And yeah, and they have big moments, they have small moments, they have the really interesting things like Kevin's are really interesting because he puts folk elements in the middle of these jazzy bits. He has these instrumentals that you go, oh, that's folk, but then it's not. I sort of like, the difficulty is though, it is non-genre specific,
Yeah.
and that can be, if in some people's minds, a hindrance, because is it jazz? Well, has jazz inflection. Is it folk? Has folk moments. Is it classical? Well, a bit of that. I sort of love that about it.
Yeah, so do I, absolutely. And I think actually you're kind of capturing something that's happening more and more, I find, is that there's a lot more kind of cross-genre collaborations happening, particularly with jazz or traditional or folk. You know, you often hear a new a jazz album which has fiddle on it, or, you know, more traditional aspects as well. So I think it absolutely is a good thing.
And sometimes I used to be of the opinion that, you know, just because you can doesn't mean you should, you
Yeah.
know. It's like, just, oh, I'm going to make this a folk. So I think that when I go back to your original question, you know, why, how did they come across, how did the genres of how they were written come with it? I think it's because we didn't make that happen. I
Yeah.
think it's because we didn't go, oh, I think a bit of jazz and folk will go lovely in this
Yeah,
track. It was, I'm going to make some music, and whatever that music feels or comes out of will be what this track is. And because I suppose I have a you know, jazz was sort of the first thing, the thing that I sort of sing mostly. Then there is an inflection that comes across in some shape or form across all of them, or it's my voice, so it's the same voice. And I hope that it flows and it doesn't sound as if, oh, she's doing her jazz voice. And I hope that never happens, because that's not what I want ever to come across. Or she's trying to do folk now. It's not that. It's just,
no, no, no.
here's the music, here's the song. I am singing this. And actually, for me, I totally loved singing the Scott songs.
Mhm.
It was a real challenge, because I wanted to get it right, but I didn't want to. I went to Sheena Wellington, who you know, to say, am I saying these correct? Am I saying these words? Because I was also really aware that I'm not Scottish, so therefore I didn't want to be pretending to put on a Scottish voice singing Scots. I wanted to sing these words because actually it's a language, and like you sort of bravely sing, you know, speak in French or you speak German with the accent
Yeah.
you have. I sort of thought, well, I need to make these so that anybody can go, oh, I can sing those songs. I can sing those Scots songs. They're beautiful words. They're gorgeous words. I can sing those words. And I hope that's something that will come out of it, that people will go, Scots, it's just a song. It's a beautiful song. Let's just sing that song. I hope.
But what you've discussed there is absolutely feeds into the poetry, because this was someone, along with a lot of his contemporaries, who was writing somewhere small. You know, it could be sunlight through the window or through the curtains, somewhere, you know, cosmos. They were looking at the universe and often mixing the two together. So some of the themes and everything are quite small, and then you've got these much larger ones, and you've got the importance of Scots language, which to, you know, that generation of poets was very important.
And interestingly, because you know, some of his stuff is that pure Scots stuff, but then some of the stuff he goes between. I mean, Sheena would go, well, he's used this English word here, but then he's gone and put a Scots word, you know. And it was really interesting as we talked about, as we looked at the poetry, you know, it wasn't all really obvious stuff. She said, you know, his way of going back and forth, because he wrote such a lot in English and then brought and such a lot in Scots. He didn't. Funny enough, if you think about it, as I've just only thought about it now because we've been talking about it, no, he was that same thing. He was writing poetry
Yeah.
whatever came from him, I imagine, was the thing that he felt was right for that thing. And if an English, a word in English needed to be there, and then it was had a Scots word somewhere else, then that's okay, because that's what. Do you think that makes sense?
I think it does. I think, you know, you're thinking about what word fits here. And I think most poets in particular, you know, really consider that very carefully. And certainly someone like Soutar, I think, would definitely have considered that very, very carefully. And of course, this was at the time of McDermott's Lallans, where they were trying to come up with like almost like an official Scots language, which in my opinion didn't really work that well. But you can see it in the way that he wrote, and some of the, I mean, he answers McDermott's "A drunk man looks at a thistle" with "a thistle looks," and I've got it here, let me get the title right. "The thistle looks at the drunk man." So he turns that on his head. So, you know, he knew where he was and who he was writing for and all of those things. And I think the language he would have considered very, very carefully. I doubt he would have used a single word without careful consideration.
No, I think not. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I just think I sometimes, I sometimes just take the book and I'll just look at some of the poems. I love, well, one of the first ones I wrote was "He Who Weeps for Beauty Gone." I just think that's just the most beautiful thing. I mean, it's just so, yes. And I love the fact, it's 2 lines at a time. "He who weeps for beauty gone hangs about his neck a stone." I mean, it's just lovely. "He who mourns for his lost youth daily digs a grave for truth." It's just all this. I just think it's a beautiful poem, and it was one of my favorite ones that I did. It's one of the few ones I actually play myself. There was uh, uh, a twinning event on from Perth the other day, and I played that one, added on the piano myself, and I played that myself sometimes. But yeah, I just think they're just, and the simplicity of it.
Yeah.
Some of them are short and incredibly simple, and actually, to be honest, that was also really interesting as well, because these songs go from what, 2 minutes, 2 minutes 14. I think "He Who Weeps" is 2 minutes and 2 long, to the longest one is what, 4:53, or actually "Parable," which is 4:23. And so you sort of go, oh, there's not a lot, there's only 8 lines. What can I do with 8 lines to make a song that doesn't last 1 minute long?
How long's the guitar solo going to be together?
Whereas, and I sort of fairly, especially things like "He Who Weeps," that is 2 minutes straight through. But I find myself doing, we did it very, very rarely. Actually, we always were very true to the poems. I mean, we never paraphrased, or every so often I would add in the odd "oh," because I was in the flow. And sometimes I would maybe duplicate a line, because I felt that line warranted duplication from because they are songs. They weren't just attuned to a poem and there's the poem, thank you very much. They had to be crafted. I mean, and they were crafted into what they needed to be for the purposes of telling the story. And I think that also, I was listening to somebody the other day who spoke about songs and songwriting, and talking about they need to connect. And when you're listening to these words, you have to, for me, the words, these are poems, the words are upmost. They are front and center of the songs, without a shadow of a doubt, in my head. So it's very important that everybody hear every one of them, and that they get what the story of that song is about by listening to each one, and have it, their little vignettes. Actually, that's what they are.
Yeah.
Concept album with little vignettes that you go, here it is sitting on its own. But I sort of really like the idea it's sitting on its own. But if you heard the one before and the one after, you sort of just have a flow. You get a sense about them. Yeah.
And that exactly that sense that kind of that runs through. And I do wonder if, having done the theatre piece first, where I guess you're having to tell a story in theatre, kind of affected that.
I think, I think it probably did. I think it did, but also it was, there's the best part about finishing an album is putting it together and working out what fits with what. Or you listen to one, you go, nope, that doesn't do it for me. oh, but that does. And that would work really beautifully there. I mean, this is probably about the fourth version of where they should all be, you know, oh no, let's move that one to the end, that one. In fact, it was my son who at the end of the way said, no, Greeting Bernie has to come before ballad. I feel it. And we went, oh, you're right. So I had this somewhere else. He listened to it and he went, no, I show. And that's what's funny. In the show, that was a moment where his niece was, the niece, what was her name again? Who came to stay from Australia? Getting old. Anyway, that was the point in the show where Jen Bates, who was being the Madame Lizatzka, where Paul was playing Greeting Bernie, and she came and she kept playing the piano because she was being a child. She had come back as this 5-year-old or whatever, and we laughed the whole way through that song. It was great fun. And he was right, you know, whenever my son listened to it, he went, it makes me go, you've had all this stuff, you've had He Who Weeps, you've gone down to here, and it makes me go, which makes me ready to listen to ballad at the end, which is very light and very romantic, and it's in its way of such sadness, you know. Yeah, so I think that the storytelling, where things go, is really important. I hope we've got it right. I'm fairly happy with the way it sits through and goes through. And also because I wanted, it was quite important also that people got in the album that you didn't get all Paul's together and all mine, you know, that variation, because there are similarities in our styles with our own songs. So it's nice to go, oh, I'm hoping that people listen to it and go, oh, I wonder what's coming next. Because after the first 4 songs, you have no idea. Would that be right?
The variation in the music kind of follows the variation in the themes. And as I say, he kind of covered a huge, wide range of themes. So it does kind of work out that way, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned Ajay there a couple of times, and that's Ajay Close, who most people will probably know better as a novelist or journalist or whatever. So how was Ajay involved?
Because Ajay was the writer in residence, had been the writer in residence at Soutar House. And because the Soutar House had, over a period of years, a number of people who became Soutar writers in residence. And she happened to be the one around that time. And also she had been sort of working on some plays. She'd done a play about suffragettes. I think it was called Cat and the Mouse. And so whenever because the getting to this point that why doesn't this project happen was from a sort of a series of situations where I had done these songs of Soutar songs the year before. I then was lucky enough to get a thing called the Catherine McGilvery Get a Life Fund, where I was given some money and to take basically a year off and be creative, which is the most beautiful gift anybody could give you in your lifetime. And it meant that I could stop doing any type of official job work I was doing and then just focus on writing music. And literally, I say it in the actual book itself, when I was on the train coming up from London, having just got this award, I was thinking, oh, what could I do? What could I do? And Soutar came into my head because I sort of really loved doing it. I thought, why don't? And I had this idea. I thought, why don't I get me? I didn't want them all to be by me because I know this is a very dull album of just 18 songs written by Debra Salem, because it's what other people bring to the table that make things really exciting, and it's other musicians and especially as composers. And I spoke to Kevin and Paul because I'd worked with them in a jazz way many times before that, asked them if they were interested. And so by the time I got up, I was thinking, I've involved in theatre. I write music for theatre, or I had for most of my career. And so theatre and a way of telling, I thought to myself, if we do this, it's not just his songs, it's got to be a way of telling people about him so they know more than they know more about him when they leave than they did when they came in. And it's something enjoyable to come to. And then I had this thought that I wanted his story to be told. And I thought, I was thinking of like monologues, like in 19 Soutar, blah, blah, blah. Ajay then takes it to this other place and thought, why doesn't it happen through the vehicle of a medium? And I write these monologues with him. And I thought because she was a playwright that she would write the monologues really well, but it was much more than that. She crafted that whole way of working it through. It would never have been what it would have been had she not taken it and thought, here and this song and here, oh, and this song, and also made it made it flow, you know, in that way. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end for something that was literally just telling the story about
Yeah.
somebody, you know,
Yeah.
and it was very clever.
And I mean, it's been out there, it's been at the Fringe and stuff. Are there plans to resurrect it once these things can be done?
I don't know if we'll ever resurrect the show. Maybe. I mean, I think we did it, to say, we did it in a tour, and then we brought it back from Made in Scotland, which was really lovely in 2014. And that seems like a ridiculously long time ago now, you know. And I never forgot it, because it was always the thing that hadn't been finished. It had never done. It had never been able to be tied up with a bow and go, that's it now, we're done. The album was the tying it up with a bow. It had to happen, because I remember feeling really sad when we finished the last show and thinking, these songs I think are really beautiful. They give something um to the Soutar repertoire, because lots of people have written songs with his poems before, but they give something else that maybe some of the other songs have been written longer times ago and have a more classical bent to them. Maybe this gives something that maybe somebody might take one of these songs and put them in their gig. You know, maybe they'll go, and this is a little song, the poem, the words are by William Soutar, and I'd like to sing it, and it goes like this. You know, that would be, maybe somebody else would take one of these. And I think also Paul and Kevin are phenomenal musicians and composers. And we were lucky to have Patsy Reed playing on the original quartet. And although she didn't write anything, which, had I known she lived just up the road, which I didn't at that stage, I didn't even know she lived in Perth, I would have said, and you should be part of this too, Patsy, but I didn't. Foolish me. But anyway, she added so much to it with just what she brought to it as a musician. So I was really sad at the thought that they would be something that would go into a drawer, never to be heard again. I felt that was just not the way it should be. And so and with the support of Paul and Kevin, just pushed it through to try and get the Kickstarter and to try and get the album done, and to know that that would be it. And I think what I really would love to do, I think it works really well in literary places. So if there's like literary festivals and places where words are really important, and where the understanding and the appreciation of the words in association with the music will just give you another way of listening to the words. And the fact that you will have the poems. When we did the original show, uh, um, Ian McIntosh from the Friends of William Soutar and I made sure that in the programme, all the poems were in the programme. You always got the poems wherever you went. You went to the show, you got something to take away that told you a bit about him, had the poems there. And that's why, for the same thing, there's a poem book in the album. The poems and the songs and the story about him and the story about the show is in the songbook. You always have him. It's not just, oh, we've done these songs and the poems are secondary. They're always there to take away. So I think somewhere literary festivals, and I'd love to be able to do it over the next 2 years. But I had conceived of, you know, should we do it online? But I just feel that this stuff is a live thing. I'm a live performer. I think what you get from it online, which people are doing fantastic stuff, I don't know if I could be that fantastic online. I love that moment where people are connecting in a very obvious way with you and the words. And also I think I quite like the idea. I think we did something recently, and I quite fancy the idea of maybe bringing it along with a poet who might do some of his other poems, so it becomes a bit more, because it's an hour. I mean, the album is an hour from beginning to end. And actually, I think that's really lovely. I think that when we do the album live, we just do the album. We go from the start and we get to the end. We go, this is the album.
Well, folks, thank you very much.
And it might have. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever get the chance to have, because we brought Andrew and Signe, Andrew Robb on bass and Signe Jacobsdottir in on percussion, because we could. Yeah, we didn't do that, and they weren't in the original, but it added something really lovely to their, again, the quality of the playing of what they do is just so beautiful, and what they brought to it. It was a very chilled. We recorded it over 3 days, because that was just the way we had to do it. Yeah, so I hope, I would love that to happen, and maybe one day we might consider doing the actual piece of theatre again. Maybe we'd really look at it. It's just really hard to know, but for now, would love to do a gig with it.
What I would say is that even if you don't know Soutar's poetry, the music, you know, on the album is just incredible. It's incredible playing right across these fantastic musicians that you put together. But what I think it will do, and it goes back to something we mentioned earlier, is get people interested in the poetry itself, and people say, oh, I want to know more about this man, I want to know more about his work. And it strikes me that that's at the center of what you wanted to do with the whole thing.
Always, it always was. I mean, and it is still. I mean, they sit. These songs wouldn't be these songs without his poems. I mean, they are. I'm doing a lot of songwriting at the moment, and I'm working with some other on some other projects where I've been given lyrics and stuff, and really, you feel a weight of responsibility when you take somebody else's poems.
When somebody else's words, he didn't choose to leave them and say, 70 years time or however many years, please Debra Salem, put some music to my piece. It wasn't his choice, so therefore, because he's not able to say, no, I don't want you to put that out there, I like it, I don't, you know, you have to be really responsible and hope that you are delivering his words to a public in a way that you hope that if he was around now, he would be proud of and feel excited by, and go, yeah, thank you very much, I'm very happy you've done that. Yeah, I think that it's really important. I mean, there's so much stuff that's happening. I hope one day, for example, I would love, and even if nobody was there, I would love Paul, Kevin, me, and Patsy at the very least to go into the Soutar house and just sing the songs. I mean, I think that would just be just gorgeous, just for us, for no other reason. I think it'd be quite fun for people to watch, having said that, but actually, wouldn't it just be gorgeous? Because I when I did the Kickstarter campaign, I went and recorded the hello, would you support this Kickstarter in his start. Now, nobody will know that, but I do. I was beside his window and looking at where he would have been in his bed. I always feel very much it is that whole thing that I said very early on about I love people's lives. I think they are very, they make me think about what they did, why they did it, who they were, and I put myself empathetic. Yeah, I find myself thinking, if I was him, if I was sitting there, I would have been looking out there. I would have been sitting there. I would have been looking at that cobweb in the corner. You just do that whenever you are in that space. So, yeah, I think I think I would love more people, and I know more people have, and I know every time we did a gig, there was I know there was people who went to the website to find it out, and what they do with that. I think the issue then was that they were, again, so what, when they had done that, what was there to take away other than looking at the poems online? If and when this book comes out, not just my our album and CD, but when his works come out, then somebody will be able to have something that they can go, right. And of course, you have things like with Perth, you have the Soutar Theatre, and they have the in the library in Perth, there's the whole big exhibition of Soutar stuff that's always there and present. I think I have a feeling that people in Perth take him for granted.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think we just go, oh yeah, that's William Soutar. We all know about William Soutar. But
Yeah.
actually,
I suppose that
it's
can
really
happen
funny.
when you're growing up with the plaque and the thing,
Yeah,
probably mentioned in the schoolroom, that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, Craigie School's just opposite. My kids went there. It was just opposite his house, you know. It was just like, oh yeah, William Soutar poems, but I don't know until I started reading it. Did they go, oh, William Soutar, oh, he lived there. He just lived there. I find that really interesting. Yeah, it's been a great honor, really, to be honest, to be able to put this together, you know. And I'm very lucky because I also really love to do something that has I love projects that have a focus. You know, it's really nice. I mean, I might do another album of my songs or something, but to actually have something that you can put it around and say, this is all him, you know.
And I do love the idea that with the CD, you've now feel you've tied this up. This is now completed, and I suppose it lets you move on to other things.
Except it does. It does, except we didn't perform it. Yeah. We haven't performed it. We had originally, whenever we before lockdown, we were due to launch it at the Burnham Book Festival last year. Right. Now, and had that happened, I probably would have pulled my finger out and got it mixed a bit quicker. whenever lockdown came, and then that obviously wasn't going to happen, I held back a bit more, and then we went, well, let's just, and it took a lot longer to do than things were tricky in lockdown, to get your head around things and to get your head around music and how you were going to finish things. So that's why it didn't actually end at the end of the day, get finished in November. And then we launched it in the beginning of February. And I suppose so, although this part of it's tied, the book is tied, and like I'm very excited. I think to myself, we have a songbook, you know, Paul Harrison did all the scribing for, or put all the songs together and made them into things that people could play. And even doing that was a great adventure. It was like, oh, we found a lone dotted crotchet that should have been not there, or a lone and, or a lone apostrophe, or have we got the Scots right, and make sure, because we definitely chose. I remember talking to Ian from Friends of Soutar about things like, you know, were we going to put apostrophes in for things like In A Sma Room doesn't have the apostrophe. He said, well, because that was an anglicization by not, and that says that the word is meant to be something else, and it's not. And so when we were going back to the book, we were going, what does the poem say? And also because Paul had done the poems and made sure that all the lyrics were correct. Now, we had used the lyrics, the poems that we had been given from whatever volume of whatever book when we originally did them.
Mhm.
And so I'd sung them like that. And so whenever we went back, we were going, oh, is there incorrect? Is that the right word? There should be something else. So that was really interesting, and we had to do so much minutiae to make sure that it was absolutely correct. But I love the fact that maybe somebody will sit down at the piano and open this book of. I mean, how cool is that? There's music here.
I've got a lovely copy here, and this idea, it was great to see the music on it. You know, it's such a different publication, I guess, along with the portrait, and a fantastic introduction as well. Well,
yeah, I think it was really lovely to be able to do that, because not everybody plays guitar. Some people play piano, and we really wanted to make them, you know, and that thing that we say at the beginning of it about, you know, they are a version of the songs. So all the little bits that I put in, because I go, oh, I'm going to just add a few extras, that we've taken all of those out and just made, here is the song. Just now you take it and you make it your own. No, I have to say, I will feel I can go, if I hear somebody else singing one of them, just one, doesn't matter whose one it is, doesn't matter if it's one of mine or one of Paul's or Kevin's, if somebody else just goes, I want to sing that, even if they did it at home and told me. So that's what I'd like. If anybody just plays it at home and goes, I sang it, thank you very much. That would be so cool, because by doing that, they're singing it, they're speaking his words, they're reading his poem, they will eventually be led back, I hope, to William Soutar.
It's that idea of passing on these poems and keeping the legacy going.
Exactly what I was just going to say. It is legacy. It's always it needs to be about legacy. It's what you leave behind. I mean, it's very exciting to think. Yeah, it's very exciting to think that now becomes part of the William Soutar's portfolio of stuff. You know, when there's Diaries of a Dying Man, there's going to be his collected works, there's going to be all the stuff that you know, all the other composers did, Harriet Mill and Benjamin Britten, and there'll be this, and that's really cool as well. From the point of view of us, that's pretty cool.
Oh, absolutely.
Very exciting.
Well, Deborah, thanks so much for talking to me. I love the album and listened to it for the last couple of weeks. I think it's a fantastic record. I knew Soutar's poetry a little bit, but it gave it a new context, which I think was lovely.
I mean, yeah, and that's really interesting, because, I mean, out of interest, did you find yourself, when you listened to it, did you look at the words at the same time?
Not the first couple of times, and then I did start to do that as well. That's the way I kind of, you know, time 3 or 4, I would start to look into it. And actually, it took me back to my slightly battered copy of William Soutar's Into A Room and selected poems, and go back to that again. So it did its job.
Yeah, yay! Although I have to say that we were preaching to the converted with you. I've got some friends in Belfast who listened to it, who knew nothing about Soutar, who listened to the album, and they said, "Oh, we wouldn't understand it." And they said they just sat down. In fact, I had 2 things that were really interested. They said they just sat down and they didn't speak. And they just put it on. They thought they'd listen to one and talk, and they said they didn't speak for one. They just listened to it, and then every so often they would say, "Give me the cover." And they would just see who did that one or who did the other one, because they've heard stuff before. And they texted me afterwards, said, "We just really enjoyed it. We totally understood it. We enjoyed it musically." And then I had somebody else who said that their cat purred the whole way through Ballad, because when I brought out Ballad as a little video, and they said their cat kept, every time she put it on, the cat would purr and walk up to it. And somebody else said they opened a bottle of wine, it was fantastic, they sat there in a glass of wine. So it's good with wine and for cats. That's what I'm gonna say. I think that should be the byline. Loved by wine drinkers and cat lovers.
That's the CD cover recommended for wine lovers and cat lovers alike.
Wine lovers, cat lovers, and cats. Anyway.
Debra, thanks again for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.